Hello and welcome to another weekly analysis behind the news. It seems that the Trump administration is not letting the grass grow under its feet as it plows ahead with accomplishing Trump's campaign promises. All the while, Congress struggles to keep up. As the president plows forward, liberals are getting a wake-up call on how much power the executive branch wields. Some have once again discovered that there are supposed to be checks and balances, and that states have much more say in matters. Article 1 of the Constitution delineates the responsibilities of Congress. Specifically, Section 8 covers its main constitutional areas of responsibility. The executive branch's responsibilities are spelled out in Article 2, with Article 3 covering the judicial branch. According to the 10th Amendment, any item not delegated to the federal government in the Constitution falls back to the domain of the states, the people. No matter who is in office, we must hold to these limitations under the Constitution. Congress should also not abrogate its powers by delegating these to other branches of government. Former Congresses have passed their responsibility of declaring war as well as trade negotiations on to the President. Each branch should monitor the others for abuses, and the people, the states, should keep an eye on all of them. Even though we may like what is being done by the President, we need to remember that when the other side is in control, we will be the first to complain about abuses. So let's be sure that we're not quiet if abuses occur now. That being said, we must hold our elected officials accountable to ensure they work within the confines of the Constitution. We cannot stress that enough. Executive orders must be used appropriately and not to be created or not to be used to create legislation or regulation. So how does immigration fit into all of this? Let's take a look at the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 reads, "The Congress shall have power," and there's a number of powers listed, but one of them is, "to establish an uniform rule of naturalization, which is the process that an alien-born person must go through to become a citizen, meeting various requirements." As the Heritage Foundation writes in their Guide to the Constitution, "Few powers are more fundamental to sovereignty than the control over immigration and the vesting of citizenship in aliens." It goes on to explain that the Articles of Confederation relied on the states to naturalize citizens, and that at the Constitutional Convention there was little opposition to moving this power to the federal government. In fact, James Madison called the power under the Articles of Confederation a fault and defect. The guide continues by stating that James Madison seemed to speak the sentiment of most when at the convention he expressed his wish to invite foreigners of merit and Republican principles among us. America was indebted to emigration for her settlement and prosperity. The first of the naturalization laws was written in 1795, some of which are still in effect today, including having a lawful residence of 5 years in the U.S., having good moral character, attached, of course, to the principles of the Constitution of the United States, and well disposed to the good order and happiness of the United States, the taking of a formal oath to support the Constitution and to renounce any foreign allegiance, and the renouncing of any hereditary titles. As the article says, if the states had the power to decide naturalization, the uniform rule of naturalization would fail to be uniform. To briefly comment on the latest Trump kerfuffle that has emblazoned emotions across the country, the New American magazine asks in a headline, "Trump's order, suspending refugee program, racism or balanced national security?" It begins, "President Trump kept what was easily among his most controversial campaign promises when he issued an executive order suspending the equally controversial U.S. refugee program. The executive order suspends, for at least 90 days, the entry of foreign nationals into the United States from 7 countries of particular concern. Those countries are Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. In the case of Syria, the suspension is indefinite. The order also suspends the U.S. refugee admissions program for 120 days. The liberal media and many liberal commentators have, as was to be expected, gone into action spinning the order as the uncharitable act of a president who does not care about the plight of suffering refugees. Further into the article, the author writes, Far from a Muslim ban, the order simply seeks a vetting process that would weed out those with ties to terrorism. And while the liberal establishment in both politics and media would spin it to say otherwise, there was little to no such reaction when their beloved President Obama did almost exactly the same thing in 2015 when he signed H.R. 158. And this resulted in travel restrictions to 38 countries, many with a Muslim majority. Yet, when President Trump does the same thing for 7 countries, the leftists suddenly are up in arms. And one perspective that is not being considered is that migration is a tool used by globalists to ultimately force change in government structure, legislation, and culture. For with migration comes the collective problems of the society or culture that refugees are running away from. Government structure in their native countries is the complete opposite of what we have here in America. Massive migration waves in history are usually accompanied by upheavals in society norms and a reshaping of the electorate. Without an aggressive education program in the naturalization process, migrants will neither assimilate nor reflect good moral character as attached to the principles of the Constitution of the United States, nor have a well disposition to the good order and happiness of the United States. Having a uniform and well-enforced naturalization process is indeed imperative in terms of American sovereignty. In terms of globalism, there are those that seek to flood the country in order to change it to accept their plan of regionalism via economic and political integration, which in turn, as we know, moves us closer to a world government under the United Nations or some other unaccountable world governing body. Another tool they use is war. And we can thank the war hawks of both parties of Congress for their continuous meddling that we have been doing under the guise of spreading democracy across the globe, especially in the Middle East. Much of the reason we have enemies comes from the fact that we have been in their countries for decades, sticking our noses into their business. Notice how that tool works? Globalists that are in control create a crisis and then submit additional government to control and handle the crisis. The result is many more layers of unaccountable bureaucracy added to not just our country, but the ceding of our sovereignty to governing bodies outside of our own. So piece by piece, we allow the dismantling of our sovereignty to be built into a new world governing body that scraps the American principles of limited government, independence, and individual liberty. So let's have a much larger discussion than the mere talking points we see in the media today. To take back control, we must take back the sovereignty that we have lost through our involvement in the United Nations. The Trump administration is off to a good start in slowing down the march to globalism. Let's do an about-face by getting out of the United Nations. Contact Congress today to support H.R. 193 and to get an accompanying bill in the Senate. This is the bill to get us out of the United Nations. A link to our action alert is included in the video description. The John Birch Society has been exposing and battling globalists for nearly 60 years. There is no better time to get involved than right now. Join or donate to the John Birch Society today. Visit jbs.org for more information. And be sure to like and share this video with family and friends. Sign up for our e-newsletters and subscribe to our social media channels. Until next week, we'll see you then.